I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, unexpected roadblock. What lawmakers are saying about the White House plan on student loan forgiveness. Unsafe maneuver. Why tensions are rising between the United States and China. Deadly crash. New developments into what may have caused the train collision in India, leaving hundreds dead. And communion of love. Pope Francis highlights a simple gesture that's the cornerstone of our faith. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the Feast of St. Boniface. Our top story tonight, President Joe Biden invites two world leaders to the White House this week to discuss the war in Ukraine. Today, he welcomed Denmark's Prime Minister, and later this week, he meets with Britain's Prime Minister. This as the 15-month-long war continues with no end in sight. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, these talks between President Joe Biden and key allies come at a critical time, including efforts to equip Ukraine with F-16 fighter jets and as Ukraine readies to launch a long-anticipated counteroffensive. In the Oval Office, President Joe Biden and the Danish Prime Minister hold a bilateral meeting, the first between both leaders in the White House since President Biden took office.
And together we're working to protect those values, including standing up for the people of Ukraine against the brutal aggression of the Russians.
It is so important that our allies and our friends, that we stick together and that we are united.
Their sit-down comes as Ukraine releases a video showing its military requesting silence, suggesting they don't want anyone to leak information about their counteroffensive against Russia. Meanwhile, U.S. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby addresses reporters concerning a small plane that flew over the nation's capital and crashed in Virginia Sunday, killing all on board. The military forced to scramble fighter jets at supersonic speeds, causing a sonic boom over the D.C. area.
I do want to express our deepest condolences to the family members, the loved ones of those who died in that crash. Just terrible.
And in the race for the White House, former Vice President Mike Pence just filed paperwork to run for president. Tomorrow, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie launches his campaign, and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum will soon announce his bid. And we were there when Republican Nikki Haley held an earlier event in South Carolina to kick off her campaign. Last night, she spoke at a town hall.
I think we can all agree on banning late-term abortions. I think we can all agree on encouraging adoptions and making sure those foster kids feel more love, not less.
Now, Roe versus Wade, which the Biden administration wants to restore, was overturned, you'll recall, nearly 1 year ago. And today, pro-life group SBA Pro-Life America tweeted, 25 states now have laws to protect life between conception and 12 weeks. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Thousands of recent college graduates have something in common with nearly 40 million other degree holders. They took out student loans and now they have to pay them back. President Joe Biden wanted to cancel up to $20,000 per person in student debt, but that plan hit an unexpected roadblock in Congress. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has the latest.
Good evening, Tracy. You know, the Democrat-led Senate handed President Biden a surprise defeat last week. It passed a measure overturning the White House's student debt relief plan. Although a presidential veto is likely, Republicans tell me that the president is overstepping his bounds.
This president wants to do something. First of all, it's illegal, it's unconstitutional. He wants to appropriate $300 billion to cover some of these student loans. But that money he didn't just print it. He's going to borrow that money from my grandchildren.
This is not debt cancellation, it's socialism. President Biden is rewarding those who chose the path of higher education by strapping their debt onto the backs of those who did not.
Two Democrats, Montana's John Tester and West Virginia's Joe Manchin, voted with Republicans to kill the program. Senator Manchin said in a statement, quote, "We simply cannot afford to add another $400 billion to the national debt. There are already more than 50 existing student loan repayment and forgiveness programs aimed at attracting individuals to vital service jobs such as teachers, healthcare workers, and public servants." Senate Minority Whip John Thune agrees and tells me this is just bad policy.
You know, the 87% of the people in this country who don't have student loans are subsidizing the 13% who do, and many of the people who have student loans are folks who already have undergraduate degrees or getting graduate degrees or doing well out there.
The Congressional Budget Office projects the president's plan will cost taxpayers an estimated $400 billion. But some Democrats tell me they will continue to fight, saying people need their student loans canceled.
The forgiveness portion of it, up to $20,000, is something that I've heard large cries from my constituents. And so I will definitely be supporting that forgiveness.
President Biden paused the student debt relief program 3 years ago, but payments are scheduled to resume come September. The Supreme Court will likely have the final word. The justices are expected to rule on the issue very shortly. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, the U.S. military has released a video of what it says was an unsafe maneuver by China's Navy in the Strait of Taiwan over the weekend. China's warship went across the path of the U.S. Navy destroyer. According to the Pentagon, it will not, quote, flinch in the face of bullying from Beijing. China responded, accusing the United States of provocation in the Taiwan Strait. And joining us now to talk about this and more is Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. Gordon, great to see you again, as always. First off, let's talk more about this incident and what you think it signals. I mean, what is China up to?
China is trying to intimidate the United States and countries in the region with these dangerous and very provocative intercepts. And it was not just the one on Saturday with the U.S. destroyer Chang. It was also on May 26th with that U.S. Air Force RC-135 across the South China Sea in international airspace. The United States defends the global commons, and we cannot allow China to close it off.
Yeah, and Gordon, what do you think the United States should do about this? I mean, it really does seem like an increased aggression on China's part.
Well, first of all, I think we need to step up these freedom of navigation exercises. We got to show China that we're not going to be intimidated. And also, I think we need to start with asymmetric policies imposing costs on China. The Biden administration, for instance, in response to that spy balloon in January and February, actually delayed imposing costs on China that had been planned. That's giving incentives for Beijing to act provocatively. We need to do the opposite, which means start imposing those measures to show China that we're not scared of it.
Gordon, I want to go back to the incident that took place over the weekend in the Taiwan Strait. For those not familiar, can you talk to us a little bit more about this body of water, which really is seen as a strategic body of water for the security of Taiwan?
Yeah, the Taiwan Strait is about 110 miles across, and it separates Fujian province from Taiwan. And China says that this is Chinese waters. But even if Taiwan were annexed by the People's Republic, it still would be international waters under the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea. China just is a party to that UN convention. It's just lawless right now. And so therefore, the United States and other countries have no choice but to defend freedom of navigation. And remember, it was not just a U.S. destroyer. It was also a Canadian frigate that came with the U.S. to protect international global commons.
Yeah, good point there. Something else I'm going to talk about. More than 24 people were detained over the weekend in Hong Kong on the anniversary of the 1989 protest in China's Tiananmen Square. Tell us more about this, Gordon, and what you think this all signals.
Well, this was China trying to coerce people into not commemorating the 1989 massacre in Tiananmen Square. Prior to China's full takeover of Hong Kong in 2020 with the national security law, there were always big commemorations in Victoria Park, 100,000 people, but now those have been outlawed. And matter of fact, any sort of expression of commemoration have been outlawed and people have been detained. And that's why we have seen a much more coercive China in Hong Kong right now, making sure that nobody, basically Hong Kong has become like China. There's no dissent permitted at all.
Yeah, something else that I do want to touch on happened last week. The former head of China's CDC said the theory that COVID-19 leaked from a lab could not be ruled out. This, as we know, China has continually downplayed the lab leak theory. Gordon, your thoughts on this, and why do you think he would say this, and why now?
Well, the Chinese people are going to tell us eventually what happened because they are moral. And they are as outraged as we are. And so we are going to hear Chinese voices that know, talk to us about this. Now, the lab leak theory is the most probable. And Beijing, of course, doesn't want any discussion of it because that would reveal China's illegal biological weapons program, which is outlawed by their obligations under the Biological Weapons Convention. So China does not want to talk about this at all.
Well, we got to leave it right there. Gordon, always great to get your insights and have you on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tracy.
India remains in mourning following the country's deadliest train crash in decades. The collision that happened last Friday left 275 people dead. Officials are still searching for answers. Railway representatives say a signaling failure may have led to the 3 train accidents. Some lawmakers are calling for a criminal investigation. Pope Francis says that he is praying for the victims and their families. Hundreds of thousands of people joined a protest march yesterday against the government in Poland. The mayor of Warsaw, a member of the opposition party, led the rally. The ruling Law and Justice Party has combined an increase in social spending with a support for the Catholic Church and pro-life issues. Elections are set for this fall in the Eastern European country. Well, the Kremlin says Ukraine is launching major attacks in southeast Ukraine. The claims could be a sign that Ukraine is starting its long-awaited counteroffensive. However, officials in Kyiv call the report, quote, misinformation. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including protecting teachers, analysis of a new study on a rising trend of violence in schools. And the Holy Father says that he is hitting the road again at the end of August. Well, the month of June kicks off what is known as so-called Pride Month with the purpose of bringing awareness to those in the LGBTQ+ community. But many now feel that awareness has actually become an agenda, and it's being pushed on the youngest and most vulnerable through children's programming. We go now to Julie Gunlock, policy analyst at the Independent Women's Forum. Julie, always great to have you on. A lot to discuss today. But first, as you know, last week was the beginning of so-called Pride Month, and even the children's TV show Sesame Street is recognizing Pride Month. What do you think this signals, especially when these messages are directed at our children?
It is infuriating and really disappointing that some of these much beloved programs are celebrating Pride. This is not a subject that children need to deal with or focus on. We also saw the cartoon Transformers introduce a transgender transformer, absolutely bonkers. And it seems now that Pride Month is much more about the transgender movement, and it's more about getting kids indoctrinated into this movement. Very disturbing stuff.
It really is. And Julie, I mean, what can we do as parents? What do you think?
Look, I think that we've seen some corporations back off of their Pride Month activities already. Many changed their logo for an entire month. They're not doing that anymore. I think that the backlash against Target and against Bud Light is working. Look, I'm sort of skeptical about some boycotts. Sometimes I think maybe they don't work so well. But I do think you should take your dollars and go to a business that at least doesn't engage in this kind of stuff. It's really important that consumers vote with their dollars.
Yeah, and I noticed, I think it was last week, there was two rappers, they did a song to boycott Target, and it went to number 2 or so on iTunes. So it certainly is resonating with some
People
folks
are tired
out there.
of it.
Yeah.
They're really tired of it.
Yeah, it seems that for sure. You know, I want to switch gears now. There's a new article in the Wall Street Journal that's detailing that is the rise of violence in schools against teachers. Can you tell us more about this study? It's really an alarming new trend.
It is actually, it's not new. This has been going on for years, but this new data shows that 14% of teachers have reported a physical altercation or being assaulted by a student. 49% of teachers say they either want to switch jobs or switch schools or quit altogether. But it's important for the viewers, I think, to know this is nothing new. And it's not only because of COVID. You're going to see a lot of people blame this all on COVID. Schools, starting in the Obama administration, started restorative justice practices, which basically takes away all discipline. There is a anything goes attitude with a lot of schools. And again, they don't punish children who misbehave. So this has been happening more and more. COVID certainly made it worse, but the teachers are really in trouble. And Randy Weingarten doesn't do anything but travel to Ukraine and try to close schools and keep kids masked. She's not advocating on behalf of these teachers.
Yeah, what can we do to help protect our teachers? I mean, they're so important to us, and they're really in short supply now.
I think restorative justice sounds good. It sounds good. Let's talk about it. What are your troubles? Kids need discipline, and they need to be punished if they act out. Otherwise, you have increasing violence in schools. So you need to go to your school district. You need to say, we are stopping these restorative justice practices. We're bringing back detention. We're bringing back expulsion. We're bringing back suspensions. These things work, and those things need to be returned. They simply are not in our schools these days.
Julie, we have probably about a minute so or left, but I'm curious what else you're following.
Well, of course, new people are jumping into the presidential race. And what it says to me is the Republicans have a very deep bench. We have a healthy party, lots of people jumping in, of course. And then on the Democrat side, you've got Biden. And he fell recently at a graduation ceremony, not looking too good and avoiding the press. So I think there's going to be a lot of frustration on the Democrat side, but it's good to see a lot of choices on the Republican side.
Yeah, and it was really sad to see President Biden follow the Air Force Academy graduation. I mean, we pray for him too. But curious, you know, what that signals to other countries when they see this type of leadership.
You know, it does signal weakness. And we are living in perilous times. It's incredibly scary how the provocations of China and the really scary situation for Taiwan, not to mention what's happening between Russia and Ukraine. We do not need weak leadership. We need a strong president. Sadly, he is not one. And Rich Lowry, National Review, had a really interesting article this weekend where he said, you know, a lot of us have elderly parents, and we know that when the falling starts, it doesn't stop. And this is a very scary sign for the leader of our country to be so elderly, to be having trouble and falling. That not only signals a weakness to our allies and our enemies alike, but to the American people. It's very sad.
It's very sad, and we do continue to pray for him. Julie, thank you so much for coming on. We always enjoy it and appreciate your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, securing the Holy See, an update on a pair of disturbing security breaches at the Vatican. Plus, the Pope tells the faithful how a simple gesture is like a hug from God. Abortions in Scotland hit a record high last year. This as lawmakers there consider a measure to make abortion available on demand. There were more than 16,000 abortions last year, a nearly 20% rise from 2021. Right to Life UK calls the numbers, quote, a great tragedy. Well, the Vatican has been shocked by two recent security breaches. A car drove through barriers at the Vatican 2 weeks ago. It prompted gunfire from security officers. One man was arrested, and 2 days ago, a man took off his clothes and stood on the high altar of St. Peter's Basilica. The incidents also highlight security concerns for the safety of Pope Francis. Joining us now from Rome is Andreas Thonhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Andreas, great to see you. So I'm curious, I mean, does the Vatican have a security problem?
So this Saturday, the Archpriest of St. Peter's Basilica performed a penitential rite of the Confessio, so the main altar built over St. Peter's tomb. On June the 1st, the Polish national had climbed the stairs towards the altar, which are usually off limits to the public. Shortly before the church was closing, he took off his clothes and jumped on the famous altar. With a marker, he had written on his back the words, "Save Children of Ukraine." And this only comes a few days after another man breached security at the St. Anna Gate of the Vatican close to midnight. We reported on this and were already wondering then how it was possible that he drove all the way to the San Damaso courtyard of the Apostolic Palace despite the Vatican gendarmerie shooting out his tires.
And Andreas, I mean, what does this mean for the overall security in the Vatican? Are there additional security measures that are being taken? And also, could you talk to us a little bit more about the penitential rites that had to be performed at the desecrated altar?
Sure. So first, I've not heard about additional security measures that would have been triggered because of these two incidents. They do expose some vulnerability, and we can be grateful that no person came to harm. However, had the perpetrators acted with more violence in mind, the outcome could have been much more serious, at least in the case with the car. Despite these incidents, we have to acknowledge that the Swiss Guard and the Vatican Gendarmerie are well trained, and in general, they take threat assessments seriously. These two accidents just show that they have to be vigilant at all times, as the Vatican is a prominent target for all kinds of activism and even terrorism, unfortunately. Regarding the penitential rites that Archpriest Cardinal Mauro Gambetti performed, he prayed the creed and then blessed the water that he later spread on the altar as a sign of purifications. Afterwards, the altar was dressed with a new tablecloth, candles, flowers, and a crucifix. What was interesting was how the cardinal explained the actions of the man with the structure of sin in our world that conditions the hearts and minds of people, as he said, and it was this structure of sin that pushed the man to make an inappropriate and deplorable gesture. This man, by the way, was detained by the Vatican Gendarmerie, and then they handed him over to Italian authorities.
Yeah, very disturbing. On a different note, Andreas, could you tell us more about Cardinal Matteo Zuppi? I mean, as you know, he will be in Ukraine today and tomorrow on behalf of Pope Francis.
That is correct. We heard from the Vatican press office today that Pope Francis sent Cardinal Zuppi to Kiev, where he will remain today and tomorrow. And the short notice sent out by the Vatican, it is said that the Cardinal is on a special mission to encounter the principal authorities of the country, and he will listen to them to better understand possible pathways to peace. Certainly a mission to pray for. Tracy?
Well, Andreas, thank you so much for that report. We appreciate it. Andreas Thonhauser, EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief. Thank you again. Pope Francis is set to visit Mongolia in August. He will be the first pope to visit the Asian country. The Holy Father is expected to be in Mongolia from August 31st to September 4th. The Asian country shares a border with China. There are around 1,300 Catholics in Mongolia. The majority of the population is Buddhist. Finally tonight, Pope Francis reminds the faithful of the power of making the sign of the cross.
La presenza di Dio sempre vicina, compassionevole e tenera.
And in his Sunday address to pilgrims at the Vatican, the Holy Father says the simple gesture is a reminder of God's love for us, and making the sign of the cross is like a hug from God that never goes away. We thank you for watching tonight, and remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night, and God bless.